The XREAL XBX is $299, the One S is $449, and the One Pro is $599. That basically sounds like going from a good device to a better one and then the best one. Having used these side by side while traveling over the last few days, I can tell you it's not quite that simple. The cheapest pair did far better than I expected in the one area I was sure it would struggle in. Then it lost the round that the spec sheet suggested it should win. And on picture quality, the results were all over the place. And by the way, the most expensive pair here is still not the one that I would cleanly recommend. So today, I'm going to talk about how I would personally choose across these devices. Of course, you can Google the specs or ask ChatGPT, but I will focus on what my eyes and what my ears told me. Let's start in direct sunlight because technically you might think this should be a win for the more expensive pairs due to the electrochromic dimming feature which both the One Pro and the One S have. This basically just means that the lenses darken electronically to block out as much of the outside world as possible. The XBX does not have this. However, what it does have is a much brighter screen. 1600 nits on the XBX versus 700 on the other two. And as a result of this, the XBX actually held up way better than I expected. With the standard front lens that comes in the package, the display was bright and clearly visible. I could basically watch a movie or a TV show outside on this with no difficulty. The One S and One Pro, with dimming all the way up, did in fact block more light and the picture was easier to see. But the difference was really not big at all. So the XBX does not win this one, but it performs very respectably for its price. And I should say that I used the standard front lens, not the light blocking one that also comes in the box. The other one blocks a lot more light, so this could have been a lot closer. Now, the part where things got even more interesting, between the other two, the less expensive One S was in fact slightly easier to see in straight sunlight than the One Pro. It was a very small difference, but I saw it consistently switching back and forth. Both are rated at the same 700 nits, so I'm not saying the One S is objectively brighter in sunlight, but in my test, it just felt easier to see. Next up, productivity. This is where I really did not expect the XBX to do well at all. The One S and One Pro have native 3DoF, so you can anchor the screen in one place, turn your head, look at your keyboard, etc., and the screen just stays in place like a real monitor. The XBX can't do that on its own. The screen follows your head. With the outer lens on, there were no surprises with the XBX. It was indeed hard to see my keyboard and everything around me, and I would almost certainly not use that setup. But then I took out the outer lens. Sure, it felt a little odd wearing those sci-fi looking lenses, and I doubt I would do that at a coffee shop. But on the flip side, it just got significantly easier to see my keyboard and my surroundings, and I could actually easily work like that on my computer. Now, if you have other issues like motion sickness due to the screen moving, this setup does not solve for that. And you still don't get anchoring, resizing, or repositioning the screen. But just for being able to see what you're doing, the XBX was way more usable than I had originally expected. But then the XBX had the loss that I hadn't really anticipated. Unfortunately, text clarity is just not that great, relatively speaking. It is just noticeably softer than the One S and slightly softer than the One Pro. Indoors, you can very obviously tell that the XBX has by far the brightest screen of the three, but that doesn't make the text any easier to read. In fact, without getting too technical, based on the resolution and field of view, the XBX should be better with text than the One Pro since it has a density advantage, but it certainly did not look sharper. Now, I know not everyone is going to share my opinion on the text clarity here, but I'm just saying what I'm seeing. And by the way, between the One S and One Pro, the One S once more beat out its more expensive XREAL family member. So, for the combination of text clarity and trade-off, this was a fairly easy win for the XREAL One S on productivity. Moving on to watching movies and TV and judging it purely based on the screen and not factoring in anchoring. This was an interesting test. I tested the XBX through the in-ear pod while watching a YouTube video and turned on HDR on the glasses. And quite frankly, the picture looked extremely dull and washed out next to the One S and One Pro. Of course, the kicker was that despite the glasses saying HDR was on, the pod was almost certainly not transmitting an HDR signal. I then turned on the AI-HDR feature and the picture quality on the XBX looked better, although slightly saturated, and given the XBX's brightness advantage, indoors I was leaning towards calling it a draw with its more expensive rivals. But then I tested it with a true HDR signal setup from my MacBook, and this is where the XBX truly shone and finally notched up its first win. The picture didn't look washed out at all. The colors actually looked better to me than they did on the One S, and neither the One S nor the One Pro support HDR at all. And I think this part is worth repeating. Just because the glasses say HDR is on does not mean you're getting a high quality image. Your source has to be sending the right image to the glasses. So, with the right input setup, the cheapest glasses of the three not only hold their own, they can actually beat the One S on picture quality because of the combination of brightness and HDR support. Without real HDR content, the XBX is still the brightest and can look very good, especially with AI-HDR on, but I wouldn't put its picture ahead of the One S or One Pro. And to finish off this section, the One Pro finally scores a win here over the One S because of its larger field of view and similar picture quality to the One S, which results in a more cinematic experience. Next up, audio, and this is a very simple story. The One S and One Pro are both Bose tuned and just very obviously way more powerful than the XBX. There's not much to say here. The XBX audio is not in the same class, and the One S and One Pro are similar to each other. And finally, comfort and looks. This is where the XBX gets its easiest win with no caveats. It is 62 grams or 56 grams with the front lens off against 82 for the One S and 87 for the One Pro. You feel that as soon as you pick these glasses up, and even more so when you first put them on. If you intend to wear these glasses for long sessions, the XBX wins hands down. It also looks the most like regular sunglasses of the three, and because the front is swappable, you get a lot more flexibility on how you want them to look, where you can get creative and 3D print various covers. So here's how I would think about the price ladder for the XREAL glasses. Going from $300 to $450 gets you clearer text, much stronger audio, tons of display features like electrochromic dimming, screen anchoring, screen resizing, etc. But at the same time, you do lose the weight benefit, the look flexibility, and true HDR, assuming you regularly watch that content. The next $150, going from the One S to the One Pro, buys you the wider field of view, resulting in a slightly more cinematic display experience and 2 physical IPD sizes. However, in my view, it clearly costs you text clarity. So, get the XBX if $299 is a firm budget, if weight and comfort are paramount to you, if you really care about how they look when you're out and about, or if true HDR support is one of your top priorities. Get the One Pro if you want maximum immersion, or if one of those 2 physical sizes fits you better. But if you want the best all-around pair of these 3, my personal recommendation is to spend that extra $150 to move from the XBX to the One S and then stop there. Out of these 3, that's the one I'd choose, and I think you will not be disappointed. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one.